everyone. My name is Sohe. So I'll introduce myself. I'm the moderator for today. I run Quarterly Builders. At Quarterly Builders, we build communities for companies. That's the simplest way I can describe what we do. I do other things. Will I just stick to that for now? I have three amazing, powerful women on the panel, and I'll let them introduce very briefly. So I'll start with Ashley, and then we can go to Ruth, and then we'll go to Kristin.
Okay, so my name is Ashley Manuel. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of a company called Africa. We have one location down the street from CC Hub, Sabo Yaba, another one in Alagomiji. But we are building tech-focused talent in businesses to drive digital transformation in Africa. So we do a few things. We train software engineers, we do corporate training. For companies, we're really trying to address that talent gap. So we help companies either find the right talent that they need related to tech talent particularly. We also can advise and help build technology for them. And are building out a digital platform to enable that future of learning, future of work. The other thing that we do is we work with startups. So we do venture building. We also do some training for early, especially really at that very early stage, trying to sort of address that first gap in building high quality businesses that can then go on to secure additional funding and sort of grow and scale. So that's what I'm doing. Previously, I was CEO of an organization called IFINA that promotes financial inclusion. So for anybody in the fintech financial inclusion space, you may be familiar with that. I'm also doing some work with the Catalyst Fund to support innovation that drives climate adaptation in Africa as well. So thanks, pleasure to be here.
So yeah, hi everyone. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about this particular topic. It's a very normal thing we go through even as founders or everyone in the space. But yeah, just a brief intro about myself. I'm the CEO of Fleek. Fleek is an open banking infrastructure. We help with providing access to financial data and global payments for businesses in Africa as a whole, but also now expanded that to North America. So before Fleek, I also had a startup. So I'm a two-time founder. I was co-founder of D3s, an edtech platform where we helped provide technology solutions to a couple of universities in Nigeria. And then before then, I was in the industry working as an investment analyst, later on portfolio manager, just did a couple of things. But yeah, that's a brief intro about me. Excited to be here.
Excited to have you here. Kristin, you're up.
Hi. Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristin. It's great to meet you, Ruth and Ashley. Good to see you again. Good to be here, Queen. Thanks for having us. So I run a company called Spurt. We're essentially a people technology company. What that means is that founders often have two kinds of challenges: capital and people. We help solve the people side of the equation with technology. We have custom tools that businesses can deploy, and one of our flagship products is Sync. Before building Spurt, I was a management consultant. Before that, I was a freelancer, and before that, I was working in the nonprofit space, helping support a lot of ed techs and health techs. So that's generally, I guess, my background, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation.
Amazing. So let's address the elephant in the room. Because this is supposed to be for a professional audience, so we're going to speak to work. We're going to speak to career business, right? Do you think that there are gender stereotypes, in the workplace, in business, generally? So this is not about you, because oftentimes I think people always go on this doesn't exist because it hasn't happened to me, right? So I like generally, and then we'll speak to if you then have individual experiences in this. So yes, so the question is, and I like if Ruth can go first. Do you think that in workplace, in business and career?
Yeah, yes, I think there is. Yeah, I think it's normal, especially because aside from globally, especially because in Africa is one very unique continent, where in terms of, gender specifications, there are certain things that it's just believed that a woman shouldn't necessarily, have extensive knowledge in certain things, especially when it comes to, certain industries, or even within the same industry, just, being more technically aware or more knowledgeable in certain things. There's just, stereotype that, some people just feel like, until I talk to a man, before I understand what, you're talking about, right? So yes, I think to answer your question, I think the stereotype exists. I'm not sure you said I should share any experience yet. I think you just wanted to know if I think. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay, yeah.
actually, I want you to speak. And I actually like that young Kristin kind of like have like you have more of a non-African experience when it comes to work. So my question to you, Ashley, is gender stereotype a negative thing? Because it kind of sounds negative, but is gender stereotype, and when I say gender stereotype, I'm not saying women's stereotype, is gender stereotype a negative thing?
Yeah. So if I recall correctly, the definition of stereotype is basically it's a form of cognitive bias.
Yes.
So it is applying a kind of generalization to a group of people that's not evidence-based. Right. So, and this is sort of born in, people are very prone to do this. There are various types of cognitive bias that humans are just naturally prone to. And it's good for us to be aware of them so that we can become better critical thinkers. Stereotyping is one of them. So we're likely to kind of rely on these mental shortcuts of saying, okay, I've had negative experience with, 4 or 5 people who are all tall. So therefore tall people are mean, right? Same thing. We rely on stereotypes about gender, race, tribe, various other types of things. But they are all, by definition, they're flawed reasoning. So stereotype is something that, if I recall correctly, is grounded in not grounded in evidence. It's sort of untrue. So therefore, I would say it's negative, both because it's flawed reasoning, which we want to avoid as critical thinkers, but also because they tend to be the basis for discrimination. So discrimination is when somebody is treated worse or unfairly because of something they can't control, like gender, race, etc. And so stereotypes are oftentimes, even if people don't know they're discriminating, a lot of times people can discriminate just based on the stereotypes that they're holding.
I agree. Kristin, what do you say about, I know we have this kind of chat a lot. What do you say about, stereotypes that, exist for men and women, but since we're having a female gender conversation, what about stereotypes that exist for women that kind of end up being a positive thing that we lean into? Can you hear me, Kristin? There's some background audio.
No, not on my end.
Okay, great. So what I'm saying is that let me know if it's positive. Are there stereotypes against women, right, that kind of play out in our favors that we lean into, and then the ones that don't play in our favors, we then cry foul? We can't hear you. Audio has gone out.
Yeah. So I think the subject of the conversation we often have is that the stereotypes are a reality, right? And so the question, particularly as entrepreneurs, professional women, where are the places where leaning into those stereotypes, leaning into those moments where you're underestimated or you're not seen as a threat can actually, work in your favor, right? Because it means that you come out of nowhere, as it were, and are able to, seize the day or take advantage of the community. Somebody once reached out to me and they said, hey, you know, I feel like I'm only here because they needed a woman and I'm the only female. I'm like, but you're in the room, right? So take the space. You know what I mean? Just take the space, and now you get to be obnoxious about it as well because you're the only woman in the room, and you'll make sure that people remember you. So I think part of leaning into some of this, being underestimated, almost sometimes being invisible, is that you get to surprise everyone, right? Um, One of the easiest ways to be excited and to be content all the time is to have low expectations. It works the other way as well, right? When people have low expectations of you, you'll be like, "Oh wow, so impressive." It's annoying, it's irritating, but honestly, it beats not being in the room. I think that's the one thing I've learned is that it beats not being in the room at all. Obviously, there are better versions than that as well, but if it's a question of not being in the room or being the token in the room, you might as well take being the token, I think. But of course, the best.
Actually, I would like you to speak to this because you have experience as an operator, as a founder. It's a very tricky thing for us, Trisha. Let me go back to roots. In fact, actually, the best. Actually, I want you to take this too because you've experienced it on the reverse, right? And you still experience it, which is funny, but I will explain. Can you hear me, Ashley? Hello.
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah. So what I'm battling about is that have you experienced given an opportunity because you're white, because you're female, right? And it's obvious they're not even trying to hide it, right? So how does that make you feel? Because some people feel like, I'm gonna take it anyway, right? I was born white and female. I'm not about to change it, right? Or does it lead to imposter syndrome because you're like, did I get this on merit or did I get this because of some, DI or some posturing because they want to have a white face, just to say she's on a board, she's speaking at events. Meanwhile, they may not exactly give you the influential position or the influential place. They just want you to just sit there and look pretty, right? So how do you navigate? Because we're saying to women to take opportunities, right? But how do you navigate when you're taking opportunities that are, they're not complete opportunities. It's like they're asking you to play a role. You have a side table, you have a role at the table, right? How do you navigate those things?
Yeah, I think so. I agree with Kristin, right? And first of all, it's hard to discern people's motivation. So people don't usually come out and say, "Oh, we're putting you on this panel because we want a certain kind of diversity or look." You can just sort of infer, but they don't usually tell you. And let's be honest, the ways in which people are selected for things from hiring to funding to speaking is highly flawed anyway, and usually not just based on technical merit. So I think it's a strange system. For me, I won't accept to speak somewhere or to go somewhere if I don't, it doesn't align with what I'm trying to achieve in terms of impact, and what we're trying to do with the business, or a kind of another objective I'm working toward. B, I'm not going to accept something if I don't feel like I have the capabilities to do it to a reasonable level. But most of the time when I'm asked to speak somewhere, I do genuinely feel I can do as well or better than the other options they would have considered. So that's why I accept. I mean, it's sort of interesting. I think there was a question in the discussion guide about intersectionality, right? So the same person can have privilege in some regards and be have a lack of privilege in other ways.
Yes. Yes.
For me, if I'm actually quite deliberate because we do have a lack of female voices in some of the spaces where I find myself. I am deliberate, especially about saying yes to being in those spaces. And sometimes also deliberate about speaking up. Again, I'm not going to speak up if I don't have anything to say. I have strong opinions about that. But for example, if I to an industry workshop, I have a background as a facilitator. I know I can facilitate a group. If they're asking for volunteers to stand up and facilitate and whiteboard and present back to the room, I'm going to do that because I think it's important to have some women doing that. But I think, like you said, I'm also, if I felt somebody was selecting me instead of a more competent woman who is not white because of race, then I would obviously turn that down, right? So I guess
why would you actually? Why would you? Competence is relative. Why would
I would
you?
put the other woman forward if she's more competent than me. And if the reason that they are choosing me is because I think they want a white person there, then I would put the other woman forward. I think generally, if there's another speaker who's clearly more competent than me.
How will you know? How will you know you're not the selection criteria? How would you know?
It depends. So, but sometimes we know. I will say, I don't know if others have had this experience. Like I said, most of the times I'm asked to speak about something aligns with what I'm capable of speaking on, right? This topic, gender stereotype, I'm very comfortable with. I've worked in this space. I'm very happy to talk on this panel. Actually, in fact, if I put, I just had this conversation the other day with somebody who was asking me to run a session on pitching. And I said, I'm comfortable with that. I work with startups, I've done training for startups, but you might be a little bit better served if you actually had an investor, somebody who's working for a VC firm, because they're seeing a wider range of pitches. They're in that every day. They might be able to give some more specific experience, but I'm happy to do it if you want me, right? So I think, I mean, now we're sort of diverging a little bit in terms of topic, but I also philosophically agree. It's why I think it's immoral to pray to get a job. I think we should have the most competent person should emerge to the extent possible in systems that are subjective, like putting people into roles. Oftentimes it's hard to even assess pure merit. The context is complicated, and like I said, I think those systems are highly flawed. So if I'm capable of doing it, I'll say yes. But if I think that
let me jump in. Let me jump in. I think there's like wider context here, right? Which is, and I think it goes to the subtext of Queen's question, right? So women are put in a kind of like diversity opportunity box, right? And something like about 80% of diversity funding, for instance, when it comes to fundraising, goes to white women, right? So it means that despite the vast women of color, Asian, Black, Latina, 80% of it are going to go to like the Ashleys in the room, right? So I think in a conversation like that, right, part of the question is, what does it mean to break bias and address stereotypes in those spaces, right? So I think it's not just a conversation about, because I totally agree, and this really is my philosophy, is better have a woman in the room than not at all. But I think the question is, for the women in the room, when you do take up that space, how do you use that space, right? How do you use your microphone? Because I think that's where like that next phase is, right? Because I think even amongst us, within ourselves, and switching from race a bit, so Ashley's not on the spotlight. It's the same thing with class, right? So it's the exact same thing. You went to Oxford, you went to Stanford, you went to Princeton. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be more.
Or you schooled in Nigeria.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So it doesn't mean you're going to be more competent than the next person, right? But we all know how our society sort of like, address, class and deal with privilege, right? So this question about like intersectionality is one that like I actually think we have a long way to go on, right? Because it's like sometimes we're thinking about, okay, let's just like, oh, we need a woman in the room, right? So let's throw a body in there. And so the question for me is always like, how do you make sure that when you do have the microphone, you're making sure that you're amplifying the right voices, you're making sure that you're bringing, the right visibility. One of the things that we don't talk about enough is disability, right? People that are completely invisible from spaces that I actually think that they should be a huge part, of shaping. So I think in conversations like this, when we're talking about sort of like barriers and who shows up in the room and why they get to show up in the room, I think the other important part of that conversation is what happens once you're in the room, right? And how do you use the microphone respect? I think Queen has dropped off, but I think Ruth might have something to say. So I will.
Yeah, I was gonna say something about, that extra point of once you're the one in the room, how do you open the door wider for others? And for me, this is something I always think of like every time as a founder, as a woman in the space, right? Especially even in my space, being the fintech space, right? For me, every day I think of it that you just have to 100% be successful. And I just feel like it's no room for failure. And the reason is, yes, it can seem it can seem like a lot of pressure. But the fact is you finally found yourself in the room, being one in the room. To open the door for others to come into the room, you need to show, or you need to, prove beyond reasonable doubt that you were successful, so others should be allowed to get in because they can be successful. So it's almost like there's no room for failure. Exactly. There's no room for failure. It's a lot of pressure, but it's just the reality of things, right? But that also helps you to be successful as well, because once you know that there's no room for failure, you're looking for every single way to be successful, every single way to make it work every single day. So I would say as a person, it has also groomed me to be like 100% always.
Must be a mentor.
Yeah, so actually, let me jump on what you and Ruth are basically talking about. So I saw this movie that women typically, that when it, especially among your peers, right, that women typically are for themselves. It's so, how to explain this to you? So they're basically fighting for their survival. They're fighting for their seat on the table. They're fighting for their place in the room. They don't really have that energy to be fighting for yours too, because they're not in the position bar, right? But I want us to make this a bit more practical, and I want to speak from two. I wish I was in the room as CEO, so we'll know those that are in the room. But let's just speak generally, right? Let's speak from a career point of view and a founder's point of view. So from a career point of view, I do recruitment. Kristin does recruitment, and I'm not going to lie to you. This happens all the time. Clients come in and say, I want a female EA. I want a male finance person. I want a female marketing manager, right? If you send them mails, sometimes they are open, sometimes they are not open, right? So at the beginning, sometimes if you're competent as a woman, you most likely will get a seat in the room for entry level roles. Entry and level. Most of the people that get hired from me are women. They're not like, so surge of people coming in the beginning. Exec, all those women is supporting family or a lesser ambitious career, so they might have it. So the question really is, the reason why women don't understand in the career path in workplace, is it multifaceted, or is a stereotype, negative stereotype against the reason why they cannot grow in their careers? Why don't they get to seniors? Kristin, can you hear me? Okay, you want to get?
Okay, yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you clearly. So, I mean, the question is, and I think this piece around the the recruitment thing. Yes, the tribal preference thing is very real, actually. As somebody who does, helps companies solve this problem, it can actually a lot of the reason why a candidate is rejecting, a client is rejecting a candidate, and you have no idea until, somebody points out that, hey, this might actually be the subtext. So now I'm actually grateful when they just, spell it out. But in terms of, moving through the ladder and like climbing the career ladder, I think that's a really complex thing. And, I made a comment in the chat that was kind of like half joking, but also really serious, in the sense that one of the things that I most appreciate about our younger, power and professional women coming up, Gen Z, is that I think that they take not taking the system as seriously. And I think what that has meant is that they've created more space for themselves, right? A really accomplished acquaintance of mine quit her job. She was doing really well at the firm. And she said because at that firm, she didn't see any female models of, what she wanted her life to look like, right? So there were 12 leaders at the firm, two of whom were women, both of whom were not married, didn't have kids, and she didn't want that model of life, right? Now, looking at her career, so what did she do afterward? When she quit her job, she took time off, she got married, she had a couple of kids, she's back in the workforce now, right? But there's a kind of like version of analysis that might look at that as failure, right? Look at that as like, oh, you see, she was working and she left and she, went on maternity leave and she's been away from it. But that's not the vision of success that she wants for her life, right? The vision of success that she wanted for her life included all of these things. And I have every confidence she's going to do all these things. And she's back in the workforce, she's at a top job now. And I know she's going to, quote unquote, catch up, right? So I think that some of the issues around this idea of the ladder and like, climbing and ceiling and all of that is that we haven't even, because we've been excluded from that conversation for so long, even the visions of success and the models of success don't necessarily include frameworks that are always aligned to what we want to do and what we want to be, right? So like personally, I mean, marriage, kids, not a huge priority for me, right? But that's like one framework of success, right? There's other frameworks of success that are equally valid, equally important. And I think part of what equality and progress means actually is validating those other models of success, is creating space and creating, institutions and entities where those versions of success and those versions of climbing through the ladder and navigating the professional world, or navigating the entrepreneurial world, are also seen as equally laudable and are also seen as equally valuable. But I think that is part of shaping the conversation, right? That is part of what you do when you get into the room. But I'm sure the women here have very interesting perspectives in this as well. I mean, Ashley, you're a mom, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I am. And it's interesting. So it was partly because I was moving, right? But we relocated back to the US when I started having kids, largely because my husband was fed up with Nigeria. My Nigerian husband, he was over it and thought he's never moving back again. Well, here we are. But we relocated at the same time that I had kids. I was able to do some sort of flexible work, which was great. But once I had my second child and I had two kids under the age of 2, I was doing very little work. So it worked out really well for me. I mean, we were able to do sort of what worked well for our family and what I found fulfilling, but definitely, and I think things are changing. I noticed even recently, I think it's even recent that LinkedIn put like career break, or that's been sort of a valid thing, because I remember earlier
I
in
saw
my
it recently and I was so excited about it. Like somebody put career break parenting and I was like, oh my God, you got sis. Like I was so excited to see it. Like
Because
most
before,
people put career
we
break
used to
because
get advice.
they went for an MBA or something. Like it was good to see someone say I was a full-time mommy. That's why I went on the career break.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was
Because
good.
that's just a valid part of life. But we used to be advised not to have a gap in our CVs when I
Yes,
started
yes.
working, which was less than 20 years ago. So it's yeah, and I think maybe there, and this is also kind of the context of historical lack of appreciation for quote female work and female experiences, because I will say, you know, having babies, dealing with babies, especially in the US where, and my husband was traveling a lot at the time and I was kind of by myself. There are some skills that came out of that. They were painful, right? but there's some skills around time management, my own self-preservation, self-awareness. They say you never know how much patience you have until you have children, right? But also like empathy, understanding people, which is a crucial leadership skill, influencing people that are very difficult to influence, aka toddlers, right? So there's valid experience there that historically hasn't been valued at all, that never went on to a CV. Maybe we'll see them in CVs in the future. I don't know.
Yeah, so I wanted to quickly jump in on founders running a business, getting investment before we go into questions because we have 20 minutes left. So actually you're a founder, Kristin, you're a founder, Rich, you're a founder, right? Can you talk us through building your business and dealing with investors? Some people have really bad. Some people have been told to their face, I'm not sure what to invest in you because what if you get married next year? What if you have a child? What happens to your startup? Do you have a male co-founder? Right? Some people have really interesting stories. Can you walk us through some of the, awkward conversations you've had, building your businesses?
I mean, I'm happy to go first if you want.
Yeah, you can. Yes, you can.
I think three of my favorites, right? So one was an experience where this is when I was raising my angel round, right, for the business, and this fellow that I worked with and supported for about maybe 5 years prior says, I don't know that you can build a business, Nigeria is just, it's tough for women, but I support you. I love what you're doing and, go for it. And then maybe 3 months later, he's like, hey, so, I'm thinking about stepping back from my business. I'm thinking, do you want to run it for me? I was like, oh, you remember that I run a business? He's like, oh, that's true. That's true. You were doing that thing. And I realized, like, in that moment that there's an interesting cognitive dissonance, right? So previously I worked with him essentially on strategy. He was asking me to run his business in his absence, but the idea of me building and running my own business, like that flip, just hard, like just and the funny thing is it's all innocent on his part. Like, well, let me put it this way, maybe not innocent, but not conscious, right? It's all subconscious. Like for him, it's just like, oh yeah, like she's competent, she can run this business. But she's a woman, she can't run this business. Like and it made no sense. Like I was like, if this man thought about this cycle that we've been through over the last 6 months, he'd ask himself some really tough question. But what I realized was that there's just all these, assumptions and biases that like are molded and shaped into us in really invisible ways, right? And so, in fact, what stood out for me in that moment it was being more conscious myself of what some of my own biases and my own assumptions that I'm not super conscious of, but are super ridiculous in that way. What are those like? Another favorite one that I experienced is there's a fellow that I basically used to do like, portfolio strategy building for, supporting his portfolio, helping him to identify what ventures to invest in and, and so on and so forth. And I said to him, hey, so, I'm working on this little fund and I'd like to, I'd love your support. And he's like, oh no, that seems really interesting. Why are you doing that? Like, that was his question. It was like, why? I was like, but what do I do for you? Is it not build your portfolio and invest in companies? So it's again this idea that like something about you
Like
stepping
you can
out.
play a supportive role, but why are you trying to be the
No,
visionary? Why are you trying to be the
yeah,
one in
I used
charge?
to have it on your own. Like you need to be in this framework, right? And so there's this sense of like maybe yes, you can do this thing, right? So it's like yeah, you can be COO, but like CEO, really? Like you know, and I think that that's always the moments like that, and I've had a few of those. I mean, there's also just like tons and tons of moments, typically people who don't know you, or like really weird moments where people just don't take you seriously at all. And I think there's
I think
nothing you can do about that. But I think for me, those two moments, there's a third, but I won't go into it right now just because of the other
yeah.
ladies. I think that those two moments for me are like really interesting because you get all this trust on the one hand, you get all this, responsibility, but on the other hand, just that small switch to ownership is a really hard one for them. And I always find that fascinating.
Yeah, and this thing you said is very important. Two things is I see as a trend. Is becoming a thing where you have women hired as CEOs, right? And then the founder then becomes group CEO or chairman, and then it wants the CEO, to be somebody that doesn't have executive power. So you're CEO, but you cannot make a lot of decisions because you still have to. So I'm like, don't insult me. Call me a CEO. Let me know that I'm a CEO and I'm reporting to a CEO. Do not call me CEO and I don't have executive power. How does that make sense? Like it makes no sense. I remember one time I was speaking to a guy that I just left the studio. I was looking to join a growth stage startup, or even an early stage startup. I think early stage I was trying to be very practical at the time. I said I'm not joining an early stage startup. I'm not going to found in the product ready, but I want to get equity because I have experience in market operations I can build. And then he says, what are you bringing to the table? Why should he give you equity? You can hire for what you're doing. Like the insult, I felt that insult down to my toes. Like it affected me. I didn't speak to that guy for weeks. I was like, I started questioning what I was bringing to the table. Like, because it was supposed to be someone I looked up to, I want to tell me like, so why should he give you what equity is? Why should he give you equity? Right? It's just painful because when you're doing, a little well, oh, congratulations, you got a fellowship, oh, nice. When you're doing things that are at par with your male peers, your female peers, then it's like a threat. Who are you, to get that grant? Who are you to get that funding? Who are you to run a big business? What do you know? Or she's doing well because of the man thing, she has a man that she's doing less with and all. And it's just very painful because they would rather women be small and just do the small stuff versus doing the big stuff. You're doing the big stuff, you're a single toxic woman, that's why you don't have a man. Or you're doing something wrong. It can never be because you're competent. Absolutely never be because you're competent, really. Or you got lucky, or it's because of a gender thing, oh, she got a pass to the gender. Um, I want us to just hear from Ruth, but I think Ruth said she had a bit to say. Ruth, do you have experience? I won't call it gender stereotypes, but preferably around work or building your business, so that we can have 10 minutes for questions.
Yeah, thanks. I can totally relate with most of the things you said. I've had several instances. In fact, one that comes to my mind, actually two, both investor-wise and even like business-wise, just in terms of relationships with partners or, trying to seal a partnership or trying to get a client. Investor-wise, yes, I've had, someone talk to me before and, ask whether I have, a male co-founder. And oh yeah, why don't I talk to your male co-founder to understand, to really dive deep into? And I'm like, I don't get it. Like I probably but again, the good part is in my company, right? My male co-founder sort of knows how to, I don't get defensive in those kind of things, to be honest, right? Most of the time, he's probably going to be the one to say, you know what do you mean? She can actually answer everything. In fact, I can't answer all these questions you're asking me. She's in the best position to answer it, and the person will be like, you know what? Oh, what? Sorry about that, right? But again, even in terms of, either a client just asking you that, can I just speak to someone else, right? It makes no sense actually, but it happens, right? And most of the time, I try not to get defensive, but at the same time, try to like tactically answer the question and just make sure that at the end of the day, most of them end up becoming sober and realize that, it was just a very stupid thing to have said. But at the end of the day, you can't fight it really. It just happens. With investors, I think the most comfortable investors I have had or had like a good rapport with have even been the ones that never spoke to my co-founder, right? I've had investors just talk to me, and off the top of me talking to them, explaining what we do, and even explaining technically what we do, they're just fine with it. And I'm perfect with those kind of people because, it means we can have a good rapport without you thinking that someone else can give you more information than I'm giving you, which makes perfect sense. But like I always say, at the end of the day, these biases exist. You can't change it really. I always just think that results are the best thing to, just take away some of this bias. Once you keep showing,
So basically, result cancels nonsense. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. For me, and especially because what we are doing at Flick is, extremely technical, right? So oftentimes it's not just about the business part. It's about me explaining APIs, and they're like, how do you have a woman explaining all this? How do you even understand it? You're the CEO, right? I thought you were just business, right? And I'm like, I don't understand. What do you mean? Right? You can see it. Even sometimes it's not verbally spoken. Sometimes it's the reactions of, just someone that you can, understand all of this technicality. But again, results cancels nonsense, really. So
yeah, especially if you show up like a feminine woman, like someone who was leaning to femininity, it kind of rubs it the wrong way. If so, some women are very strong and are brusty, they instill fear in you, so you grudgingly give them their respect. You probably get in the box, you call them the B word, right? But you can't say it to their face. But some other women, they show up in their feminine energy throughout. So
exactly. And you're like, are you sure? Are you sure
you have what it takes?
I'm like, but yeah, again, just show results, and most times the value would
see who will value you. I don't think it's about results. I think that results kind of helps to command respect, but there are people that fundamentally still think you're small, still think you're incompetent, still think that you just got lucky. And I don't think there's anything we can really do about that. Kristin, Ashley, last words. What have you done to kind of like tackle gender stereotypes for yourself or for others? Ruth says, she works on getting results because results kind of, begets respect. So she's instead of talking or, playing the victim or being offended, she just focuses on getting results. And so when you want to question her competence or question her gender, she tells you, I know who I am, I know what I've done, and this is what I've done, and then she leaves it there. Is there anything else you guys want to share with the women listening?
So I think,
Ashley?
Yes, I think we've got a little delay. I think fundamentally, gender inequality, it's a systemic problem, right? It's not because a few individuals woke up and were evil and decided to be sexist. No, that would almost be easier to address. But when you have kind of pervasive gender norms and stereotypes that are widely held structurally, also, we have workplaces, nobody necessarily intended to do this, but workplaces were designed for men, right? In context of, the family settings that we have. So for me, I think a lot about kind of that system and how we can work to change that over time, because I think that's fundamentally, what needs to be done. I will be honest, I've not remotely figured that out, including in my current work, even though it's something I'm really passionate about. And I'm still experimenting and still looking to kind of have conversations and partners and do whatever to figure out what we can do. A few things that I do, though, is number one, so we're really training the next generation of leaders in tech in Nigeria, and some of them, will go around the world. So one thing I do is we focus a lot on critical thinking and reasoning. Gender stereotypes are just flawed thinking. And I do training. I've built curriculum around gender norms and some of that kind of gender thinking, which is a starting point, but at least we kind of expose people to that through training, like better understanding some of the stereotypes, building their skills around rethinking, unlearning, etc. Number two, kind of experimenting around some of the systems and structures we have in place, and maybe also being deliberate. Third, about addressing some of the gender-related barriers. I'll have to admit, even me, like embarrassingly recently, I realized even our own program that we have, training software engineers at Semicolon, it's really not designed for women. And I didn't realize that until recently. And I now need to think about, and what I mean is that happens with a lot of our products, a lot of our programs, a lot of our services. If you don't deliberately think about women, and when we're designing, we sort of design for who's already in that. And if you think about the software engineers that have been in the ecosystem, they're mostly male, right? So even, trying to rethink structures, do we need to look at different schedules? Because whether or not we think it should happen, women have a lot more home responsibilities, either caregiving, either cleaning, either cooking, whether they're married, whether they're staying with family, right? It's the reality. How do we accommodate that? Do we need to look at caregiving services? Do we need to look at schedules such that if you're on your period and you really can't come to class for a day or two, you're not going to feel under pressure and feel behind? So there's a lot that we're still thinking through, but I think for us as leaders and in our businesses as well, it's starting to just maybe the first step of thinking about those systems and structures and what's within our power to start to influence.
Thank you, Ashley. Kristin, do you want to jump at it? What are you doing differently to kind of like mitigate that?
Yeah, no, I think I had the exact opposite problem as Ashley. We were having something like, maybe 60% or 65% of the applicant pool was male, but 80% of our team was female. And I was like, yeah. And I realized that I had really overcorrected for gender, for women, essentially. And so I had to actually redress a little bit of balance there, and just make sure that, okay, this was a space where like men felt equally welcome and men felt like equally represented. Because I think I do have that natural sort of design because I've also done a lot of work in design thinking, and so one of the things that I was super cognizant of was how many spaces are not designed for women, for people of color. And so I think that naturally I was overcorrecting for that, and so starting to think, okay, no, this context is a little bit different, and I need to actually redesign and reconfigure certain things so that men feel welcome and feel like, this space is equally, theirs as well. And equally being the key word, right? Because the idea is not to displace women so that men can feel comfortable, but to make sure that everyone feels like this is a space that we can share in productive ways. And I think, look, that balance is always tricky. And I think part of what Ashley is saying and what I'm saying is that building requires intentionality, and I think one of the biggest issues is that intentionality and that attention doesn't happen either way, right? So for most people in your life that are reinforcing stereotypes, and setting up barriers, you'll find that most of it is not conscious, and that's actually why it's doubly frustrating, right? Because you first have to do all this work to bring attention to the issue and then find the energy to do the work to resolve the issue, right? And so that can be a tricky part of the experience. Is one, how do you bring the visibility? How do you not expend all your energy trying to justify why there's a problem in the first place. And I think some of that is just sharing the load. I think some of that, one of the things that I said, I was speaking on a panel for women founders last year. One thing, the question kept coming up in different ways. We're not invited to the spaces. There's a bros club. There's this, there's that. And, at a point I had to say, yo, guys, like, we need to create our own spaces, because that's the thing that I see we do not do enough, right? There's so many spaces created by men, curated by men, and subconsciously curated for men. We're not doing enough, I think, to curate our own spaces, to create our own inside jokes, to create our own tunnels, to create our own opportunities. So, I think for me, there's where the work is for us, right? For people like me, for people like Ashley, for people like you, Queen, for people like Ruth, is how do all of us, okay, now we've had a nice kiki, but what are we going to do next, right? That for me, I think is where the work starts.
I agree with you, Kristin. I think that it's to take a while, because you need to have women that find their personal power, are able to sort that themselves, to then say, how do I build community? How do I build a network? How do I ensure that I'm supporting my own women, right? So, for example, I'm kind of like evolving into an investor career, and of course, because I'm a woman advocate, right? I'm thinking, how can I help more founders get money? Because I was hearing statistics like only 3% of female founders, get funded. And I was like, it's 3%, and they're like, and they're saying, they're also saying that founders, female founders are typically about 50%, but only 3% of them get the money. so like, it's even so bad that female angel funds, right? They now support women and women managed business. What that means is that because they say that they can't find enough women to write checks for, support you if you have a female co-founder or if your COO is female. So women fund men, right? Are there questions from the people? Hello, can anybody hear me? Yeah, so I've seen, yes. Can we get questions from other people on the call or people that are in CC Hub? Are we just going to assume that we have none? Okay, so what I was going to say was, my own feedback was two things. The first thing that Ruth said, results, basically, get results. It just helps get results. The second thing that I would say is that you need to get, you need to work on your grooming, your personal grooming. Work on your personal grooming, work on your presentation, work on your confidence. Because sometimes you don't get the opportunities because you don't work. So you're working on your technical skills, but you're not working on how you look. You're not working on your social networking. So like, I don't know, Tommy Christian, the Bible says that it's God that sees the hearts. Men look at the outward appearance. so if you are not, you want to get an executive role, but you're not looking like an executive, sometimes that's just the reason why they didn't give it to you. The third thing I would say is that you need to get male and female allies. So what most people try to do is they work on being very competent. They work on being the best at the job, but they do not have allies. You don't have influential allies, male allies, female allies, either your peers, your superiors, mentors, sponsors, who can actually help you. Those guys are not on the same plane as you. The information they can give you, their rooms they can actually carry you to. Like, I've gotten into places because a mentor was going to, and they just said, yes, you can come. And they literally carried me into the room. I had no business there. But because I was going with a mentor figure, a sponsor figure, I got access to that same place, right? So sometimes it's not enough to just be good and just be good in your house or good at your job. You need to have some of those people. It's hard to find, and when you find, treasure them. But I think that if you have female allies, male allies, it kind of can accelerate your career or your business forward.
Yeah, I was going to jump in there and say something. I totally agree with what you said, especially as regards the allies part. That's something that not many women do often, basically because I think men just have, it just comes easier for male founders to sort of, keep interpersonal relationship. You can understand why, because there's a lot of, tactical, you have to be careful as a woman on how to maintain those relationships, especially being in the society that we are. But at the same time, a lot of times you get male founders that are able to probably go to the club or go to a bar with, other male founders or mentors. And naturally, it just comes naturally for them to have people that can speak for them in several places. So I consciously had to do that, learn how to have allies, mentors, just people that are there and they can, walk you through those rooms like you talked about. So yeah, I think that's something that females, generally women, have to do. Yeah, so totally agree with you.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I think the last thing I probably say is that we need to keep, like, how do I say this without being biased? I'm a community person, so obviously I'm biased. But I think that one of the best ways to accelerate your network is by being in the right community. And I'm not just saying female communities. It depends on what you're trying to do. You're a founder, you should join as many founder communities as you can, and use that to just go from knowing 5 to knowing 50 people. It kind of has a way of pushing you forward. When you have the power of community, you know how to manage it well. So if you're not good at networking and you don't want to go to funny places with funny people, if you actually are part of a community, there'll be a lot of group stuff. And like what my father said, there's certain numbers, right? So I would say a very good hack to that is find a community of similar people and hang out with that community, basically. All right. If we don't have any questions, I don't know. It seems like there's no general question coming in. Also, did you create any questions for us? I know it's over time, but did you create any questions for us? Victoria and Mustu, any questions from anybody on the call or in person?
While we're waiting questions, I want to just point out 2 other things. So I think we talked about how, men, naturally refer each other, support each other, and how we should do that more. I just want to double tap on something, which is also taking up space, right? One of the things that I noticed is that men will often ask sometimes irrelevant and silly questions in gatherings, but I remember them, right? And I noticed men doing this more, and I realized that it's just a technique for visibility, right? So you stand up and you say, "Hey, I'm John. I run this company that does blah, blah, blah. So what do you think about the investment landscape?" It's a pointless and silly question. And I would never ask that question because it's so poorly framed. But that's not the point of the question. I realized that I was actually underestimating the poor man's intelligence, right? And I realized a lot of men do this. It's to take up space, right? It's to show up. It's to be seen. And it's something that, I still haven't figured out how to ask, poorly phrased questions. But I have made now more of an intentional point of when I show up in spaces, not keeping quiet, right? At least say something, right? If you have something to say. For me, I still have that barrier. Like I have to figure out something to say. But I think just like cognitively being, deliberate about saying, let me ask questions, let me show up in the room. Somebody that does this also really well, I've noticed, Ashley and I are in a community together, actually shows up in spaces by asking questions, by offering commentary. It's something I've noticed about her. And I realized she's one of the few women that does that in that community. And it's a trait that I think many of us women don't cultivate because we're just like, yeah, I don't have that much to say. I'm not, but like, find it to say and say it, yeah. Because you that's how you get seen. That's how you get noticed, right? And you don't necessarily have to wait till you have the authority that Queen does in a space, right? She's the community manager, she's the facilitator to show up, just take up that space and take up that authority. Because the other thing related to this idea of asking questions and showing up is that assume the authority. That's another thing I noticed, right? Is that very, very often men just like they just jump into things, they just get like, yeah, I'm a fintech expert. And then they say it enough times that they're like, oh, I'm looking for fintech experts. And then they're calling them. I'm like, no, this dude just decided that. Like, he really is not. But he said it enough times that, like, when people are like, oh, where are the fintech experts? They're like, oh, yeah, John's a fintech expert, he said, right? And that's the credential, right? So just being mindful of that and, and creating a lot more intentional visibility for yourself and a lot more ownership. I know we didn't get questions from the community, but I did want to share that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So I hear you, Kristin, and this is something I'm very big on. So a lot of people don't believe what I show up with very strong energy, but in person I can be very, very, into myself. But this year I had to be extreme. Show up for events, ask questions. I even have a content creator following me about recording. It's very uncomfortable, but it's the kind of visibility I want and I need because of what I'm trying to push myself into. Men do this, like I said, it comes naturally to them, right? To apply for things they're not qualified for, show up for places, make introductions, even sometimes make bogus claims of things they can do that they cannot do, right? Women that are overqualified, we don't even say that we can do it, right? So I'm learning to sniff whatever they're sniffing and show up, that level of ambition too. Because it's sometimes it's one of the ways to actually move forward. And I do agree that yes, you need to show up as an authentic self. But sometimes you also need to be a little bit more intentional about this is more intentional about the visibility that I need to actually move forward, basically. I think this has been good. I'm sorry we've gone over time. And Mosu, can we take a picture now? Thank you so much, everyone. I think this was good. Ruth, I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. I'll reach out.
Yeah,
Thank you
absolutely.
so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Kristin. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Mosu and Victoria, for having us.